It's not the pale moon that excites me, that thrills and delights me. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you.
Hello, and welcome to the 11th episode of the Nearness of You podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Noel. Today's slant on the theme of nearness will go right to a phenomenon known as Mindspeak. As I will discuss during the interview, though I used to be a skeptic, an experience in East Texas finally brought me around to certainty on this phenomenon. Today's guest, Tennessee researcher Rick Reles, has much to share on this topic, from his own instances of Mindspeak to an astounding night spent in the forest, flanked by Sasquatch, in the company of an autistic man capable of immediately channeling their messages to the human group. After speaking with Mr. Reles, I will play excerpts from a recent interview with neuroscientist and psychiatrist Diane Hennessy Powell. Powell studies autistic savants and finds that many of them possess striking and measurable telepathic abilities.
That brings this sensation. Oh no, it's just the nearness of you.
Well, Rick Reles, welcome to the Nearness of You podcast. It's a delight to have you on.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts on Mindspeak in general? Have you had experience with it before?
I have. And so, and you and I talked about last year, the whole science versus woo side of things. I take the versus out of that. Tom Powell convinced me last year at the Ohio Bigfoot Convention to consider both sides. His whole speech is about we got to unite and we've got to consider both sides because the frequency of reports on both sides seem to balance out the ledger. And so I think I've interviewed enough witnesses over the years to believe there's something to that. So if you label it Mindspeak or whatever, I have experienced times where words, images have been in my head when I've been around these things, and they've had meaning, whether it was, leave now, or, at one time it was don't look back, run, get out of here, kind of thing, go, go, go. I had that in my head. I've had images, in my head that later showed up in life for me, which has been interesting. So I think you got to pay attention to it. I've talked to enough witnesses that have had messages in their head or been, kind of told something that I think there's something to it.
Can you give an example of an image that later manifested itself?
I was on an expedition in, I think 2015, northeast Iowa. We were in the dark on the side of a hill near a swamp. I got an image of out of the blue, and I was just trying to clear my mind, just free my mind as we were standing there, because we knew they were there. We had heard some whoops and a growl. And I had an image in my mind of like an arch, a large arch, almost, if you see something that's luminescent that you light from an incandescent bulb and it lights in the dark, it was that color. It was just an arch, and entangled sort of an arch. And I don't know why, but it was there. Think like a St. Louis arch, the only made out of trees and branches. And it was in my head, and I kind of forgot about it. And then a year or so later, I was out in the woods with an associate in upstate Wisconsin, and it was about 5 a.m. September, coming into an area, and we were walking a trail, and we knew they were above us on the trail, and all of a sudden the sunlight was coming through the woods and lit up what they had built. They had made an arch over this trail that literally was a replica of what I saw in my mind a year plus before.
No mistaking it, huh?
When I saw it, it stopped me in my tracks. That's exactly what I saw, and the light lit it up, the early morning light, to make it look like it stood out in the woods. So around the surrounding darkness, there was some light coming through, and so I don't know where this led to, why they built it. It's the second time I've seen an arch of that size. I mean, literally, I'm 6'2". I stood inside of it, and it was a good 1.5 feet over me, And
Or why they gave you the image so far ahead of time.
Yeah, and why they built it, but it came back to me. I was like, there it is. Have you had experience with that sort of thing?
I've only had it by proxy. I think I probably told you this when we were having lunch, but I was with my friend in East Texas who was a habituator, and I visited her 5 times, and she was apparently in mental touch with a female Sasquatch who lived right in nearby. All sorts of things that she told my friend and my friend relayed to me matched up to what I knew from Vermont. Like I asked her, could she give me any advice about my own research area? And the message she got, she said, well, it's in the big water east of you is where you should go. And that's this reservoir. I mean, I assumed that she meant this reservoir, which was directly east of me. And it's where I was researching already, but I hadn't told my friend that. And then she said, oh, and she says, don't go on the side with the dirt bridge. Go on the other side. And it's a reservoir. It has this big dirt, next to the dam. It's the dam next to the outflow. And I hadn't told my friend that. And in fact, the opposite side of this big reservoir lake was where I first heard from a witness who had seen a, quote, 7-foot tall hairy man running through the woods. And so that's precisely where it was. Another time, it was a 2011, and it was a terrible drought in Texas. Everything was just desiccated and brown and 100 degrees. And so I had brought with me a laminated picture of my backyard in Vermont, which was all green and lush. I wanted to show both my friend and her Sasquatch colleague this my yard, just kind of as a gesture. And so when I got there, I made sure to keep that picture inside my shirt, up against my chest, facing inward, so that my friend had no way of seeing it. And then when we took a walk, and the Sasquatch said that she was across this big field in the shadows in the trees, and so making sure that my friend was behind my back, I held this picture up toward those trees. And behind me, my friend channeled the voice of the Sasquatch, and she said, "So green." And she had no idea what this picture was. It could be anything,
Right.
And then the final straw that broke the back of any skepticism I had about this was, I was just about to leave on the final morning, and we had, because it was a drought, a heat wave. We had been sitting out in the yard a lot in the shade because it was too hot inside, too expensive to run the air conditioner all the time. So we'd just been sitting outside for 4 or 5 days and had heard no sounds. We heard some knocks at night, but never in the daytime. So here it was at 9:15 in the morning, right before I had to go to the airport, and I said to my friend, could you ask her if she could make a goodbye sound for me? Because I'm about to leave and I want to say goodbye to her and hear her, if she could make a goodbye sound. And my friend got that kind of faraway look in her face, like she would, and she says to wait. And so I'm thinking, yeah, sure, nothing will happen. And I swear to you, within 10 seconds, about 150 feet off in the woods, here, bam, of a knock on a tree. Just kabam! So obvious. It was like, and at that moment, it's like it swatted away my skepticism like a grand slam home run.
Yeah, it's a call response. It's an action response type of thing.
I mean, the only way to explain away that is if she was wearing a wire and she had a human friend in the woods,
right,
wearing a wire, just in case, I asked to hear a goodbye sound. So, but I haven't been able I have never had Mindspeak in my own head. Just through my friend, I've been convinced that it's legitimate. But you told me when we were looking at structures here in Vermont last year, an astonishing story about your experience with was it a young man, autistic person?
Yeah, and yeah, I'm glad to relate some of that to talk to you a little bit about it. Late 20s, and I'll keep his name anonymous. I'll
Yeah,
use
please,
another
please
name
do.
for him. But I've been on a couple of expeditions with him and his dad. What I find fascinating is that he seems to be, for whatever reason, able to channel. That's probably the best word. Some thoughts from them when they're around. And so as we're talking, I'd call it Mindspeak or whatever. He just seems to be it's like having a UN interpreter.
Yeah, that's what it was like with me with my friend in Texas. I would say, ask her this, ask her this, ask her this, and when it was working, she'd have
exactly.
immediate answers. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I had the same experience, and yes, this I'll call him Sam. He's autistic, but it was almost immediate. A couple of times with him when they were around.
Is he profoundly autistic or more mild?
Well, you're the expert on autism. I've enjoyed your writings about that. Actually, I've referred to it a few times. I've found it valuable because I think there are some parallels. He was profound maybe is the right word. He very focused on taking notes, everything. So carried a notebook with him. Very focused on order. I would say another thing in the group. You had to be careful not to, invade his space. So you couldn't talk, which was fascinating to me. I didn't want to be interrogative with him too much, because that would be invasion. And yet at the same time, he was getting signals, images, words, speak from the Sasquatch in the area. So that wasn't invasive on their side with him. You follow me? So that's one of the takeaways I got from that. And I want to relate to you today, where I often felt like if we were talking with him, the conversation got heavy or too much for him to interpret, or it actually became invasive. I'll use that word again. However, on the other side, he was very quick to tell the group they're thinking this, or they're saying that, or they're asking that. It wasn't invasive.
Wow.
So figure that one out for me.
Did he have a tough time talking just in normal life when you weren't out in the woods?
Yes. Yeah, a bit. Because it almost seemed like too many thoughts were coming to him, or too many, and you know what that, yeah. Hard for him to express, just like he was, rapidly writing notes down, even the next day, writing notes all the time. So very intelligent, and a lot of thoughts in his head, too many to get out. And however, when we were around the Sasquatch, he would just start talking and saying they think this or they're wondering this, and that didn't seem to be hard for him to process.
As I recall, you told me that he hadn't even known about Sasquatch before you took him out. You guys took him out.
Yeah, I think the first trip I was on with him was his inaugural trip. He's been on a few since, been invited on some expeditions, but no, the first time he was, again, in a situation where they were around it, he was just processing their thoughts. One in particular I'll relate to you because you had asked me. It was an expedition we were on. It was in Iowa, and a lot of the areas you go to there in the Northeast, it's the glaciers have formed a lot of valleys and a lot of canyons you go into. So you may have miles and miles of cornfields, and all of a sudden you go into a canyon area that's a state park, or it's a big area. Well, it seems like the Bigfoots are resident in there. Sometimes there's groups of them in there. You find these. He was so this night, again, I'll call him Sam, was part of a group of us. I think we had 10 of us that went into an area that had washed out, a canyon area that was a park area that had washed out. So you literally, it hadn't been in years. But we went in there because of that. So a group of us, drove down in. We had to go over where the water had washed out and the creeks had run over the dirt trails going in. So a bit remote. And, I got the impression going in there, it was spooky, dark. We went in at night, but like who goes in there? Maybe a couple of kids parking once in a while or something, but it not visited. So we got there, and I'm looking at my notes as I talk because I want to make sure I cover some of this. But 3 vehicles, 9 or 10 of us, got out of the vehicles down in the basin of this east-west running canyon area, and immediately had knocks Immediately heard whoops, knocks. They were from the east and the west. The impression I got was that, and it was dark, but like people don't do that. They don't show up at 10 o'clock at night down in this area. It's, I think the group that was in there, Bigfoot's, pretty much had the run of the place to themselves. But as soon as we got out of the vehicle and started to talk about, the group in the dark, what we were hearing, our friend Sam, the autistic one, started to tell us things like, there's one up on the ridge in the woods above us, off to the north. There's one up there. He sees us. And then he'd start posing questions to us, which he would say things like, they want to know why we're all here. They want to know why there's so many of us. Why are we here at night? They want to know. And so it wasn't like we asked him to take this role or to begin channeling things. He just started to say it. And he didn't have difficulty getting the sentences out or the inquiries. Why are you here? Why are there so many of you? Why after dark? They wanted to know what the equipment was. Because we have parabolics to listen and some night vision, and we have red lamps on. They wanted to know about the red lights. Why are there red? Why are there those lights?
Why are they red?
And so, he was just posing questions to the group. It wasn't threatening, and we were hearing whistles, whoops, knocks. And one would come from the east side, in the dark, you get down the east side of the canyon, and then a response from the west, and we're in the middle of this. And we had driven from the south end, so if you can picture an east-west canyon surrounding us, woods and trees, we're down in the lower area where the water is, and in this flat down there. And so I thought to myself, well, like I said earlier, I'm going to use him as an interpreter, so let's get the dialogue going both ways. And so I started to say to them, tell them it's okay. We don't mean any harm. Tell them we're just here because we're interested in them. They fascinate us. We're curious. Tell them we're not hunters. I made sure he got that out right.
Yeah.
We have no guns. We're not equipped with any. We're just curious. They interest us, and that's why we're here. And so he did. He would tell them those things. And he was pulling out his flashlight, writing down things in his book.
Oh, with his lamp on the paper?
Yeah.
Did he say out loud what you were telling him to say, or just in his mind?
Well, it was fascinating, a little of both. He would step from the group and he'd be talking, but I think a little of both. But he was getting sentences back or questions back. I said to him at one point, how many are there? And, where are they? And he pointed east. And he pointed west, and he said, they're up there, and they're down here, right where we heard the whoops and the knocks from. And I said, is it a family? Is it a group? And he said, oh, it's a family. They are related, but there's a group. It's bigger than that. So, that all of this is good information because it wasn't singular, even though he had pointed out that there was what I interpret as a sentry above us that saw us. He said, no, there's a group. He said at one point, there's young and there's old. So he was relaying to us things about the demographics of the situation, if you will, which is fascinating to us. And he pointed up and down the canyon where they were. They're here and they're there. But it went from concern at first as to why we're there and what we're doing to it calmed down over the time we were in there. So our group started to walk a bit up a dirt road, a washout road that ran. As I said, we came in from the south, and then it was a way out to the north. But it was hard to traverse. It had been washed out. We started to walk up some of that. And one of the guys in our group, he's close to 20 years old, a tall fellow in the group. He was there with his dad in our group also. He started to get uncomfortable feelings, so, maybe being zapped. But he didn't want to go any further. And a couple of others in the group said the same thing. We don't want to go any further. Everybody stopped.
At one point, all at the same time, huh?
Yeah, it was just, stop. So, we were don't go further up the road. And we had heard them in the woods, like that we were being paralleled a bit. So again, I said, well, I'm going to use, our interpreters. I said, what's going on? See if you can figure out. And he said, well, they don't want you to go up here. This is their area up here. They don't want you to go up further. And again, you could tell it was genuine because he would just repeat. It was immediate. So we'd ask a question through him. He'd think it or he'd ask, step to the side, ask. But then he would just, channel, quickly say these things. Like this is their area. Up here this is theirs. This is their place. Mm-hmm. Their place is up here. And okay. I said, well, again, we don't mean any harm. We're just walking around. We're interested. Is it okay if we can proceed further up this road? Do they want us to go back somewhere? No, they want you to go back. So we turned and went back down off this open road, and there was a picnic area in the center of this canyon. We sat for a while, and around some of the tables we had parabolics and lists, and we could hear them moving above us. We saw some eye glow, eye shine, whatever, but it was very obvious, especially coming from the east side of this canyon. You could see double red sets of inquiring type eyes, if you will, in the woods, and they'd move from one area to another. And it was very observational for our group. We sat there probably 45 minutes to an hour, and we would report to each other what we were hearing or seeing. You could hear through the parabolics footsteps above moving, so we knew they were there. And clearly there were a couple of groups of them, the east and west group, they were around us, but they were jockeying for position around us, that kind of a thing. But it wasn't threatening. It was just like there was a pause we needed to take, and we were there, and so we were all listening. So then we got up and started to move around a bit, and went back to the road that was going north. And our friend Sam said, "No, it's okay. You can walk now in there." It was almost like they calmed down and were accepting of it.
And maybe they saw that you were willing to obey what they said, and then they trusted you more.
I think you're right, Chris. I mean, it got the whole mood of everything calmed down, and we didn't get that heavy feeling like don't go further. You've experienced that, you know what that is, and don't move it any further. So we were walking the trail, but we broke into two groups. I took the lead group, which was, I think, 6 of us, and we had 3 behind. And so we went, we were on walkie-talkie with each other, but we were good 100 yards ahead of the group behind. So walking along, just staying, in touch with each other. The group behind all of a sudden calls us and said, "We're stopped because large beer can sized rocks are coming out of the woods and landing on the trail in front of us."
I wondered when that was going to start.
And so then our interpreter, Sam, our autistic interpreter, says, just blurts this out, says, "There's 2 juveniles in the woods there, and they're just having fun. They're laughing, and they won't hit you with any rocks. They're just throwing them out to the group behind to see if they can scare them. They're laughing. They're having fun. Ha, 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 ha."
Wow.
I mean, he's relating
he's laughing, yeah. Wow.
In the joys, he says, "They're laughing." I said, "Well, tell them that, again, we don't mean any harm. We're going to stay on the path, and we're walking a little, but, it's making our group a little uneasy, and we'll tell them, they're just joking around." But, yeah, they're just joking. They're having fun. And it calmed down again a bit. We left out there. But I found it fascinating how quickly you could communicate through this guy.
Yeah, I mean, playing devil's advocate, somebody could say, well, he could hear the knocks and the footsteps, so it's not much of a leap to say, well, there's a group over there and there's a group over there. But as I remember, you said there was some confirmation of his information, like the next day.
Yeah, confirmation, we went back into the area. I'll give you one piece. In daylight, we went back in there, and one of our more adventurous folks went up into the woods and found where he said there was a sentry, found a rock outcropping in the woods above us, exactly where he said, which we could not find in the dark.
Well, it was pitch dark. Yeah, you couldn't see that.
Yeah. And he found it right up there. He found footsteps, areas around there where it had been worn, and actually found parts of a dead deer laying around in that area up there.
Well, that's pretty persuasive.
Yeah. Wow. The sentry had something to eat while he was sitting watching or whatever.
Wow.
But we were with this group in this canyon sitting for a while. We'd been there a while. We had heard up and down the canyon from the east and the west whoops back and forth. So the 2 groups were talking with each other, and we had heard some knocks, a couple of whistles. Someone in our group said, we hadn't heard any howls tonight. There's no loud howls. And I said, well, maybe there's no need for a howl. They are able to communicate back and forth. That would be dramatic. And so one in our group said, well, let's do a howl and see. And I said, no, we don't want to do that. You get more with honey than you do with vinegar. And so, again, I used Sam, our interpreter. I said, well, ask them why they haven't chosen a howl. We've heard a lot of whoops and whistles and things, but we have not heard a howl. So he, again, started to talk, say things like that. And he looked at us, he said, just wait a minute. And literally within seconds, from the east side of the canyon, all of a sudden we got this long, 7-second long type of howl. And so the group, it's always fun when you're in the woods with a group at night, and some are novice, haven't been there, but to get a simultaneous reaction where everybody is just dumbfounded, and that's what happened. Again, what I took from it was at that point, not only could you communicate with them, but they had accepted us, having been in this canyon that no one was in, as it had been washed out. They realized we weren't a threat. We were interested in them. They got that we were observing in a respectful manner. And I always get back to respect. Whenever I talk to anybody that goes in the woods with Bigfoots at night, I always get back to what the Native Americans, that I've spent time with, have said. Treat them with respect. Let them know you respect them. And it seems to work. And in this case, they accommodated. So they said, oh, you haven't heard a howl? Well, so one of them gave us a howl out of the woods. Actually, it was very fulfilling to us. It kind of capped the night off very nicely for us. It was very, very nice. But, that's, you take from that what you will. But, we all came away feeling pretty good about that night.
Well, I mean, that's so much like my asking for a goodbye sound on my last morning in East Texas, and there it was. Well, this has been fascinating. Rick Reles, thank you for coming on the podcast, and keep up the great work, and we'll have you back on in the future to update us, okay?
Thank you, Chris. I enjoyed it. Always fascinating to talk with you and relate some of the stories surrounding exploration of the Bigfoot phenomena.
The nearness of you.
I started thinking about anomalies within psychiatry. And I thought about the autistic savants. And I started studying autism back in '87. I studied with Sir Michael Rudder in London at the Institute of Psychiatry, which was considered and still is considered a leading place for autism. So I knew about autistic savants for a long time before people found out about them from Oliver Sacks and various other authors. And Rain Man came out and all that popularized it. And one of the things that I always found fascinating about them is that there are all of these documented reports of these children and oftentimes adults knowing information that there was no way that they could possibly know. And in fact, Bernie Rimland, who was a famous autism researcher and the father of a man with autism, he had a son with autism, he did a huge study on over 5,000 children, and he gave these stories of children that knew, when someone was coming to pick them up, without there having been any kind of routine about it, or that knew information about like a watch crystal falling out of her father's watch. Another child had a dream that her father was going to die of a heart attack. And the next day, her father did die of a heart attack right in front of her. And so there are these accounts that are in the literature that were documented by clinicians. And so I thought that's really interesting. So I came up with a hypothesis when I studied the brain activity of people with autism. And I saw that it really fit the pattern that I had predicted in my book, The ESP Enigma. I talked, a little bit about, I talked about in the first part about the evidence for there being, psychic abilities, and then the second part I talk about looking at these different populations of people that have a higher incidence of psychic abilities reported in them, and what's different about their brains. Looking for clues as to how to, because for something to get accepted by science, right, you have to really ground it in some kind of science that's acceptable. And so when people see that there's like a particular brain activity associated with the phenomena, then it to them appears more like, oh, it is that phenomena, that it's not, that it's not just, that the person is reading, behind the blindfold, they're able to somehow read, and cheat, or, yeah, you know what I mean? So I see that as my mission, is not only to try to help understand what consciousness is and what these abilities are, and modeling how they're possible, but, the brain has a role in it, where there's a reason why we're not all experiencing these things all the time, and why sometimes we do. I evaluated several savants at this, because they all came together at this conference that I spoke at. And it was very interesting. And what I found was that not only were there reports of them knowing things that they shouldn't know, but there also were reports of them being telepathic. That was the thing that I heard the most. And when I thought about it, I thought, particularly among the children who are nonverbal, and when I say nonverbal, I don't mean that they don't have a concept of language, but what I mean by that is that their use of language is very, very limited. They may, just, have a few sounds that they can make, or they may just repeat whatever they hear, but they don't really use language the way that we think of it. And those children who have this language impairment seem to be, there's this motivation built into that for them to want to communicate. I've tested 3 children several times, and I'm really impressed with the results that I've been getting.
The video you're looking at shows the experimental setup we had last spring. Haley, a 10-year-old severely autistic child, and her therapist are seated alone in the room, together at a table and separated by a tall partition that prevents eye-to-eye or physical contact. Cards with randomized numbers, words, sentences, pictures, and equations were hidden until the experiment. The therapist viewed them one by one on her side of the visual barrier and then asked Haley what she was thinking or looking at. Haley pointed with her wooden pencil inside characters on stencils with her right hand to select them, and then entered them with her left into a device that converts text to speech. You'll notice that there are no characters for division signs, equal signs, or decimal points, so the therapist had to tell Haley when these occurred. You'll also notice that her answer is 100% accurate on 18 out of 18 digits. This is just one of 10 equations that she did in a 10-minute period, with accuracy above 90% each time.
And the left hemisphere is where language, for the most part, that's, where the damage is in these kids, it's the left hemisphere language. And so they do all these compensations. So the brain is very plastic, and it'll rewire itself to accommodate what's going on. And, we think of artistic expression, which a lot of these savants, they're just brilliant artists. Intuition itself has been associated with the right hemisphere, to be simplistic in talking about the brain. I mean, obviously, it's not so black and white as right versus left, but in general, we associate the right hemisphere with things that are unconscious processes. I generated a list of words, and then I created that list, and then I had the random.org will generate a randomization of that list. And then I had that on my computer, which was out of sight of the boy, and gave the mother, the words one at a time, which were easy for her to remember, because it's a word. And he just typed it out accurately. It's extremely powerful to see this boy just sitting there, like typing like this, and then to see the words show up on the screen. It's chilling,
Yeah.
I can tell you some of the things that are different about their brain. There's something called a mini column, and that's like a little miniature computer processor. It's got about 100 neurons in it. And if you look at the mini columns in their brain, they're more compact. They have more of them, and they're also more compact. And so as a result, it's like they've got like an upgrade.
Okay.
When I think about consciousness, I'm thinking about there's all this information that's stored in a field. If you think about a magnet, and you have a lot of iron filings and you put the magnet on a piece of paper with the iron filings, they will organize themselves in a very organized array around that magnet, okay? But we wouldn't otherwise see the force that that magnet has around it if we didn't have those filings there on that piece of paper. And I think of consciousness as being like that. I think of it as being this field that is highly organized, that contains information. And it's in the body and out of the body, both. I mean, it's not contained within the body. It's ridiculous to me to say that it's just contained within the brain. I mean, it's not only the evidence that suggests against that, but it's the fact that those are people who are just thinking of the brain in the most concrete way. You know, they're thinking of it as a bunch of chemicals. And so if what you're thinking about is how does this bag of chemicals communicate with this bag of chemicals, it doesn't work that way. You know, if that's really how you think of the brain, you know, it's just like, you know, like what you buy at the grocery store, you know, in the organ section, you know, you just think of it as being that. Of course it can't be telepathic. That's ridiculous. Why even discuss it? But if what it is it's an informational field, then it can be in contact with other informational fields. A lot of people are familiar with the concept of entanglement, you know, because that's one that Dean Radin and various other people have really popularized. And so if you think about it, you know, a field can be, you know, entangled, you know, with another field, right? And so in that sense, then you just tap into within your field that where it's entangled with that other field. It's not like you're sending something outside of yourself. It's kind of like, think of it as like a microcosm. Your consciousness field is like a microcosm of the larger field, and because of that, you can tap into it.
I'm beginning work on a new book and seeking contributors to talk to me about possibly sharing your own accounts of Mindspeak in order to help enlighten the world on this important phenomenon. Please write to me at nextofkinnextdoor@gmail.com. Thank you.